Uh, get seated. We'll be happy to start. We have a lot to talk about, a lot of exciting things to talk about, and kind of introduce our panel. So, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to beautiful Lisbon. We're at the port right now. I don't know if we can see it on camera, but it's really, really beautiful. And we are at the kind of the whole week is really focused around Ethereum and building and everything, and was really excited to get this amazing group because staking, and specifically staking on Ethereum, is becoming bigger and bigger. Running from the Genesis, which happened December last year, and of course the hard fork coming up next week, and afterwards the merge. And so we really wanted just to talk about the future of staking, where it's going, what should we expect industry apart and from everything else. And so that's kind of my focus point.
Thank you. Thanks for everyone from the Blox team to host this. It's fun to be here. My name's Colfax. I'm a part of the EthStaker community. And in short, what EthStaker focuses on is education and building tools around lowering the technical bar to staking. So like making staking more accessible to non-technical folks at home. And that's like contributes to one aspect of decentralization and how can we have more people running nodes at home. So.
Hi everyone, I'm Izzy from Lido DAO. My role is Master of Validators, and basically my job is to wrangle the node operators that we have to make sure that we're delivering the best service that we can to our stakers, so that's like the everyday investors in Ethereum. I recently joined the DAO, and actually from a super traditional background, because my interest is in decentralizing Ethereum as much as possible, which is maybe a bit weird to hear since I'm here for Lido. But actually, like, my job is that within 3 years, my job should be obsolete. So we want to decentralize as much as possible. We want to diversify and distribute as much as possible. And I think it's great that we're joined here by parties whose sole job it is to figure out the best way to do that going forward, including with Blox to figure out solutions to distribute risk amongst multiple parties. Thanks.
Hi, so my name is Lanski. I'm the CEO of DappNode. DappNode's a company that's been doing free open source software since 2017 to allow everybody to be able to run nodes about anything. About ETH2 validators are the biggest thing right now, but also Ethereum nodes, Avalanche nodes, Bitcoin nodes. Technically, you could run a Cardano node, but I don't see why anybody would like to do that. But yeah, so my role is the COO, but I'm transitioning now to be more sort of like a spokesperson for the DAO. We're sort of like decentralizing the entire DappNode project, and what we're trying to become right now is basically an aggregator or like a union of independent stakers. So as I said, most people use DappNode right now, not to run Cardano, but to run Ethereum 2 validators, and they are not represented in other panels like that. Most of the validators in Ethereum are decentralized or anonymous, or we don't know who they are, and they have no voice. So DappNode tries to represent these validators in panels like this, at the table with the big boys, and so they can have a voice as well.
Hey everyone, I'm Lucas Kohorst. I work as an engineer at Foundry. Previously we've been like really interested in like Bitcoin mining and financing, but we're moving into staking for institutions. My role there is physically setting up and kind of vetting and researching the like generally the L1s that we're staking on, but increasingly we're doing L2s and other staking projects. And then yeah, I mean I physically set up the infrastructure as well.
Hi guys, my name is Mirko. I co-founded stakingworlds.com, and we try to make staking easy for everyone by curating data and information primarily on all types of proof of stake chains. And yeah, we generally try to foster like a healthy proof of stake and staking ecosystem, and try to act as an independent hub between users and validators and everyone else, protocols in the market. And yeah, we have a large data set, and have been doing that for 3 years or something. So this is very exciting to see like a big crowd like this around staking.
Amazing. You guys can hear us back there, right? Say hey. Perfect. So we wanted to do something different with this event. What we'll do is we'll have a deep conversation around staking. We'll go as long as you guys will enable us. When we see people drifting away and kind of starting to sleep, we'll finish it off. But other than that, I really wanted to kind of have a conversation in depth about the things that I think everyone is interested in. And so the way we'll do that, we have a few talking points, but please start thinking about questions. We'll have kind of a Q&A towards the end. It can be as technical as you want. We have very technical people here. It can be as non-technical, community, market, whatever you want. So start thinking about it, and we'll have the Q&A, and we can get it. And so we'll start, I guess, maybe with the elephant in the room, which is the upcoming hard fork, but basically which leads us to the merge. And so my question is, first, how do you see the merge playing out? But most importantly, what will be the impact for stakers? What will be the impact for the ecosystem? Yeah, that's a kind of an open-ended question. Who wants to go first? Go ahead.
So, the merge. We've been working towards the merge since 2014. We knew that ETH2 was going to happen. We didn't know when, and it seems that it's happening now. So the first thing that the merge is going to do is move to proof of stake, and that means that the APR for staking is going to go up, all things being equal. So people who are staking here, good for you, you're going to get more money. It's estimated that it's around a 25%. Maybe the more technical can correct me, but it's going to be a 25% higher than we have now. Also, this is not going to last, because what's going to happen immediately after this is that people are going to start staking like crazy. So massive queue to get into the validator set. And yeah, so better you start staking now. If you want to add to your validators or you want to start validating, I would do that right now. But probably the thing that I'm the most scared and terrified about the merge is MEV.
Yeah, that was exactly my next question.
Yeah. So MEV on a proof of stake chain. Like, is that, like, we basically have the equivalent to staking pools right now. Well, I mean, this is a job for us, Colfax, to work with Flashbots, to work with whoever we have, in order to give individual stakers the ability to take on these opportunities, to access MEV opportunities. While in parallel, the whole Ethereum ecosystem should be working towards eliminating MEV altogether.
Yeah, so that was actually my point. So I guess there's two groups of people. Everyone thinks that you need to do something with MEV, but there's one group which says all MEV is bad, and there's another group saying as long as you have a preset or a set of rules which are known and everyone plays with them, then MEV in some cases is good. So where do you guys stand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like it's almost impossible to fully eliminate, right? So, using stuff like open like Flashbots where anyone can kind of participate with it is probably the way to go, except for the fact that like, it's technically completely open, but it's pretty limited to those that are like highly technical, right? So I don't know, like there might be like some stuff around it where you can kind of present the opportunities to others to kind of provide capital to do MEV with, right? It's a really hard problem though, because like, why would someone that is just like incredible at writing all of these bots for MEV, like why would they, work for a company and get paid salary, right? When they can just go do some crazy arbs and make more than that in a week, right? It's a really weird incentive problem. But I mean, like ultimately, like a lot of crypto is just weird incentive problems, and then ultimately, someone kind of figures it out eventually.
There's an additional issue with MEV, and Easy, I'll get to you in a sec, which is MEV actually enables economies of scale for really, really big staking providers. And anyone who kind of went back and kind of learned the history of POS in Ethereum, Ethereum really tries to combat economies of scale. That's really what made proof of work, along other things, really bad for the little guy. But that's a big issue. And of course, Lido being the biggest pool. What is your take on that? Because that's something which I think concerns everyone.
Yeah. Actually, that's the point I wanted to bring up as well as a follow-up to the points that the other panelists made. So it's not only the fact that economies of scale like beget centralization and threats to the protocol and the health of the ecosystem in general, but it also means that you're going to be driving users and the users' money, and in proof of stake, users' money is the security of the protocol, away from decentralized solutions. So why does that happen? It happens because in decentralized solutions, building a fully decentralized and distributed system that fairly redistributes rewards to the people whose money is running the security of the network costs more, is more difficult, and needs to be designed in a way that cannot be manipulated by malicious actors. So if a protocol like Lido at some point says that we're going to make the decision to collectively not collect MEV and redistribute it to our stakers, what it means is that that money, and in proof of stake systems, the money that's behind staking is much more liquid than hash power, for example, in proof of work systems, will go to a party that has no problem taking that MEV, and then potentially also causing like a threat scenario to play out against the network as a whole. So if Binance says that, hey, we're going to take MEV, we're going to keep 0 commissions, and all we're going to take is a little fee on top of the MEV that we're going to be executing and redistributing to our investors, then all of a sudden you might end up with Binance holding 60 to 70% of staked ETH, and you have a really big problem from a centralization perspective and a possible network attack. So the only way to combat that is to either provide MEV openly or democratically, or fix MEV at the protocol level. From an ideological perspective, I don't think that MEV can be solved. In general, if you try to solve it, you just displace it. What you can do is try to minimize it, and then make sure that the method that you're using to extract and redistribute it is as open as fair as possible. So maybe that's through using Flashbots, although Flashbots has a similar problem in that in order to be a miner on Flashbots right now, you need to be on a whitelist. Who controls the whitelist? It's Flashbots. In order to send blocks to block producers on Flashbots, you need to send them to a relay. Who runs the relay? Flashbots. So until a solution like this is actually built into the Ethereum protocol, and that's what I think all stakers should be pushing and lobbying for from a protection of the ecosystem perspective, we will always have centralization concerns, and we will always have malicious actors who are attempting to use MEV to usurp either the security of the network or to take profit from other people's pockets.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think one of the challenges with the merge, other than the effect of MEV, is also with the merge, with any hard fork, there's a lot of community and social coordination happening. And I think that, ETHStaker, Colfax is, in my opinion, probably the biggest staking community out there. How do you guys approach just coordinating such a big event? Because you have a prominent role in that. Everyone needs to update their client, and I see a lot of announcements you make of it. What is your approach to that, and how do you take the responsibility to make sure that the community is very much in sync with what's happening?
That's a great question, and that's definitely a challenge. Like, how do you, the information flow of like how you can really communicate to your users. So I would say, the 2 or 3 primary ways that we communicate with our community is on our Discord and our subreddit, and then Twitter, which sort of aggregates some of the information there. And we host a lot of events, and that's like, so for example, the Altair hard fork coming up, we're going to be hosting a call for that. We publish resources on how you can actually upgrade. In some case, we host workshops for actually showing you how to upgrade your nodes. And it really doesn't begin there, though. It begins sort of earlier on in the process when people are learning how to operate their nodes and actually setting up their nodes, teaching them that it's an ongoing responsibility. It's not something that you just like set up and forget. We're not quite there yet. We hope we're actually building tooling around automating and hopefully managing some of the ongoing responsibilities for you. But when you're setting up a node operator now, it's a relatively manual process, and there is a technical bar to being able to run your node, and you do need to stay on top of the information. So we're trying to make the information as accessible as possible, and making sure that people know that they do need to continue to keep up with their updates. And that's really coming up to the merge. Like, the merge is going to be a huge point where stakers need to be educated and they need to be ready to upgrade their clients.
I have a question to the audience. How many of you have staked on Ethereum right now? Cool. How many of you would have done that if we were after the merge and after withdrawals are enabled? So less people after withdrawals are enabled? Yeah, it doesn't make sense, guys. Let's try it again.
That's the delta. Those are the
Yeah.
people that are going to join.
Oh, gotcha. So, show of hands, how many of you would stake or are staking right now? Say we are after the merge, after withdrawals. Hands up. I would say a third, maybe. A conservative 40%. Yeah. Okay, good. That's a good show of hand. If we can get 40% of the ETH staked, I think the ETH Foundation has a lot on their hands. I don't know if the network can manage that. Cool. So I think the centralization, the merge is definitely something we all look to, but I think the merge is a step towards something, and that something is proof of stake. But Ethereum, from the get-go, really took upon itself to build something which is not tending towards centralization, really actually incentivizing the network to be decentralized. And so I would ask, why is the decentralization on Ethereum so important? Because it looks to me like privacy. Nobody cares about it until you really care about it, like until you get hacked or until something really bad happens. And so why should anyone care about decentralization and maybe what we can do about it? So Mirko, you wanna get us started?
Yeah, sure. I think decentralization is important because it's one of the core value propositions of a blockchain in general. And if we don't have a decentralized system, then we can just run a centralized database or something. So we have to be decentralized as much as possible. And this plays into attracting builders, developers, everyone who wants to participate in these ecosystems. They need a decentralized system to be to have a credible, neutral framework of like building stuff and building businesses on top of that, because like there are so many people and businesses that are they're building everything what they do on these decentralized systems. So they have to be secure and as distributed as possible and allow anyone to participate and have very low friction. And that's why I think decentralization is extremely important for any blockchain.
Yeah, and in addition to decentralization for the sake of having sort of like a trustless network you can operate on, decentralization is actually great for reliability too. Like a truly decentralized network that has decentralization on many layers. So when you're talking about the hardware you're running on, the software you're running, where you're running it, the operators of like who's actually maintaining that hardware, like decentralization on all those layers can actually create a very robust network. And like even AWS, which underpins a huge amount of the internet, goes down at least once a year for a couple hours. And there are other blockchains that are less decentralized. I won't name any names, but sometimes they go down for like hours on end. We've seen that too. So decentralization is important not only for the sake of having like this sort of trustless network we can operate on, but also reliability.
The only other thing that I wanted to add, and obviously like the whole operational aspect of, you need to be able to run the network simultaneously across the world in order to ensure reliability and consistency of the new trading layer, essentially, for like every kind of social interaction that we're going to have in the future that's meaningful and valuable needs to be underpinned by something that can't go down. But I think, like, especially as blockchains are maturing and our idea of what underpins blockchains is maturing, is the importance that like what's below layer 1 is layer 0, and layer 0 is social consensus, and you cannot have true and meaningful social consensus without decentralization.
So Just a sec. So a follow up on that. That's really interesting because one of the things Lido did not too long ago was have kind of a manifest towards decentralization, and I found it really interesting because it because it's not obvious, right? It's not obvious why a company so successful or a DAO so successful want to quote unquote relegate power or relegate success to others. And so I found it really, really interesting. And I think that's really, really important that, companies like you think about it because you're holding a lot of the ETH. And so I'll jump, Lanski, I'll jump to you because I think you guys and Rocket Pool are like head on trying to attack this whole issue of decentralization. And I find it really interesting. So Rocket Pool and you guys both do software, but I think you guys are probably the only ones who actually do hardware as well. And so if you kind of want to talk about this as well.
Yeah. So I think one of the ETH2 has built into the protocol by design incentives or negative incentives for decentralization, correlation in the form of correlation penalties. And I think the hardware piece is extremely important because we can have different companies and we can have different, but if we all run it in Amazon Web Services and Amazon Web Services does a Facebook, then we're all screwed anyway. And it doesn't really matter which company is behind, whether it's Bison Trails, whether it's Lido, or it's whoever it is. It's all in Amazon Web Services. And if Amazon Web Services goes down, we're all screwed. And correlation penalties for the users of these people are going to be huge. So having the hardware decentralization is extremely important. The machines, having a network of different machines, different types of ISPs, different types of setups in general, or even countries, is extremely important for the resilience. And actually, every single decentralized validator is actually protecting the rest of us who are using centralized services, centralized or at least more infrastructurally centralized services, because it's reducing the correlated penalty that they would have. So staking behind a company also has one part of decentralization that we haven't talked about much, which is the political decentralization. Staking behind the facade of a company gives governments or entities a target to regulate. You can go to Kraken or Coinbase or any of the staking providers. And they say they can say things that can affect our privacy. For example, give me a list of the people that are staking, or they can affect even the integrity of the network. If you remember the what is it, the Stable Act that never passed and it was never meant to pass, but they said that basically validating transactions with tokens that were not legal, like stablecoins like DAI, was a problem of the person that was including this transaction in the block. So basically, if you are a company that validates and you have a 30% of the network, means that 30% of the blocks that are being produced will not have one type of transaction with a stablecoin, which doesn't really happen if you have the centralized validators.
You guys wanted to say something?
Yeah, all I was gonna say was kind of rolling back to the general point of decentralization, and it kind of echoes a few other people's thoughts here. But while it is the general ethos of crypto and blockchain and all that stuff, ultimately decentralization is really just distributing risk. And again, a lot of us have talked about here, are there's political and hardware risk. There's actual people that are running the nodes and stuff risk. There's really risk across the whole spectrum. But as you start decentralizing each part of it, you just continuously distribute the risk across multiple parties. And to me, that's kind of the most important part.
I think that follow up on the decentralization part of everything we're doing. There's a huge industry called DeFi, which is very keen on keeping itself decentralized as well, for good reason. And so I guess the natural progression or the next kind of question is, how those two worlds get combined? How does staking, which is in of itself sort of a financial instrument, how does that start to talk or integrate with the real financial industry of the decentralized world, which is DeFi? Because it seems like there's a lot of common ground there, and moreover, it seems like they can work together beautifully. One example I always give is that I would say most of the collateral today in DeFi is ETH, and so why is it ETH? Why is it not staked ETH? That seems to be the first move to make. So I would love to hear what's your take on staking in DeFi, and how do you see the world in 1 or 2 years after the merge, after withdrawals are enabled? What kind of a powerhouse are we talking about, and where could it bring Ethereum as a community to?
Okay, I guess I'm the obvious choice to be the first respondent to this because this is our comparative advantage, right? The way I like to think about it is most things that you would normally want to do with ETH, you would rather do with staked ETH, except paying for gas fees. Like, why? Because basically you would get a better price on anything that you're trying to do if you use staked ETH instead of ETH in a post-merge world, right? When the peg is 1-to-1 or potentially even more balanced on the side of STETH because it's a voucher for future returns. There are concerns here, though. Like, what if we come to a flipping point where more STETH is used in DeFi than ETH is used, right? And so the ETH underpinning the STETH, which is actually what's in like the DeFi sandwich that's underpinning all these crazy farms and harvests that we have going on, like something happens there. So the only way for us as Lido to reduce that is indeed to decentralize and to diversify and to distribute. And so that's also, to your earlier question, why it doesn't make sense for us to try to capitalize on centralization or permissioning of the network. And so to the other part of your question, like what does the landscape look like in a few years? I think we will see that most DAOs that currently have a lot of ETH on their balance sheets will prefer to have some version of staked ETH. It might be a vanilla version of staked ETH that they're running using in-house staking providers, either like DappNodes on their own infrastructure, or maybe if they want to do some more exotic transactions, they might be using variants of staked ETH, and then potentially even like doing token swaps with those or investing those in products that allow them to hedge their exposure to Ethereum versus stable coins or to the dollar or anything else in the future.
While you were saying that, I had a scary thought in my head, because as we know, a lot of the collateral for DAI is ding 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 USDC. Now, what prevents this industry, which is in the best of times a bit crazy, in the worst of times much more crazy than you want to, taking STETH, putting it into Rocket Pool as the collateral, creating a token on Rocket Pool, and then putting it into Compound and Aave, you all of a sudden get a chain reaction. If something happens there, it's a nightmare. And so what prevents us? Like, that's gonna happen. Every trader thinks about it. That's securing Ethereum. And so how do we deal with that?
Yeah, I think that's a that's a big problem, and we are very early, I think, in like tokenizing second positions and bringing everything to DeFi. And yeah, I mean, we have Lido now, and it's great, but there are going to be so many more solutions, I think. And probably what you just mentioned, this problem is going to be solved by the industry itself within DeFi by kind of further tokenizing risks and having insurance and everything, because we are so early that we have staked these now, but we don't even have the merged yet. And once this industry matures, I think there's going to be so many use cases for DeFi products around staking that are not just staked ETH for the rewards and the like automatic compounding and everything, and distributing to many different validators, but especially creating products that reduce the risks for users, make it easy for them, make it generally accessible for everyone to invest into a product and be part of it with like the lowest risk as possible, and paying potentially premiums on extra insurance and so on.
I had another scary thought in my head. So imagine everyone knows the subprime mortgage issues, right, in 2008. What happened there was a lot of people all of a sudden found themselves with a mortgage much higher at cost than their house. And so what they simply did was stop paying the mortgage, leave the house. Now, if that kind of analogy goes to the staking world, imagine somebody locking their stake, tokenizing their stake and locking it somewhere. They're responsible for the validator, but the withdrawal credentials are some smart contract. What happens if they lose that tokenized ETH, or it's becoming worthless? All of a sudden you have a ghost validator because there's no economical incentive to keep operating it. And if that happens on a massive scale, first of all, if it reaches more than a third of the network, which, again, it's a big ask. But if it reaches more than a third of a network, we're literally seeing Ethereum stopped. There's not going to be any more consensus, no finality, nothing. And just to keep score, finality is really important for stuff like L2s, right? And so, what prevents us from getting there? Again.
Go for it.
I mean, there's already people doing this, right? So they loan out NFTs and then they purposely default on them. So the only way to stop this from happening is to educate users to make them stop doing this. If we want to be, say that we're promoting decentralization and we're going to be sovereign financial actors in the sense that we don't want centralized parties making financial decisions for us and telling us what we can and can't invest in, we have to be smarter about what we invest in. If you're a DAO token holder and your DAO is considering whether they should wrap, STETH in 5 different layers of DeFi shit, you should vote no. You need to be cognizant of the effect that your actions as a holder and as a staker in the ecosystem whose purpose is to basically create the trading platform and the trading layer for the economy of the future, about the effects that it'll have. If you're being asked, whether you would buy an under-collateralized loan, then maybe you should say no. Why should we be giving out under-collateralized loans?
And yeah, building on top of that, educating users on understanding what risk they're taking on by picking a particular solution. So staking pools are great, even especially decentralized staking pools that are not adding as much centralization as other staking pools. But the purest form of staking on Ethereum is a solo staker at home running a minority client. I know we'll probably talk about client diversity in a little bit, but sort of the purest form of staking is really staking on your own. And we need to educate users on how, if they're going to choose to operate in a staking pool, how can they participate in governance to actually make sure that the staking pool is doing good things with their proposals and everything like that. So it really comes down to education as well.
So I kind of set myself up for the next point, which is, why do people choose different services? And I want to kind of get you guys on different categories. So, Colfax, you'll represent the DIY staker, the guy or the girl who stakes on their own with their own infrastructure. You guys, of course, Easy, you'll obviously... you want to flip roles? Okay, so you'll represent Lido. and it can make a grant request to the DAO for doing that. I don't mind. You can represent Lido with tokenized staked and pooled staked. Izzy, you'll represent the DIY staker. Lanski, of course, you'll represent something in the middle. So the DIY staker working as a group or working within a community, right? Lucas, institutional stakers, of course. And Mirko, I want you to kind of give us your take on how do you see the landscape from above? Because you guys at a position where you see everyone. You're not attached to a specific service. You kind of have an overview of everything. And so I'll start with you. Why do people choose different services? Aside from the obvious answer, I don't have 32 ETH and I want to pull them together. What makes people choose different types of services and different types of clients?
If I'd like to add to the question to you, especially how does it compare to, I feel like we have our asses, so our heads up Ethereum's ass, but how does it compare to other services as well, which you can obviously have the vision that you can see that?
Yeah, that's a very interesting topic, I think. And I see there are 3 main points why people choose a certain staking provider for their staking needs. First one is the reward offered by the provider, and that's important to many, obviously. But there aren't actually that many differences, so it's not the most important issue for users. I think the second point is the general like ease of use and accessibility to stuff. Like how easy is it? And how feasible is it? How feasible is it to use a certain solution? The access, like how difficult is it to set up your node and run the client securely and so on? How difficult is it to interact with the Lido contracts and so on? There are a lot of things that play into it, but overall, I think the most important thing for users is the risk overall, and I think we have to split the risk into like the actual risk and the perceived risk in a sense, where the perceived risk is maybe even the most important part, which comes down to like how do you feel with like using this provider. And that's like about the branding and everything. And we did some user surveys there actually, and this is like the most important stuff for a lot of users. It's like they want to use a provider that they can trust. They don't want to spend like, I mean, at least for most of the people that are not like hardcore enthusiasts and so on, which is great. But for them, it's important that they can use a provider that they fully trust and fully believe in, and that they have a good feeling using them. So I think that's even more important than the actual risk of like I don't know, smart contract risk and like slashing and everything else. Users want to have a solution that they fully trust in, and believe that this is the provider that can where I can store my ETH securely without having to worry at night.
Lucas?
Yeah, I mean, like, from like an institution, so like a VC or a hedge fund or like a bank or something like that, right? The primary thing that they want to see when they're staking is they just want to offload risk from themselves onto the company, right? Have some contracts in place and all that stuff, right? So then it kind of just comes down to more so relationships, of course. Have they been staking with the company on other projects? Do they have strong relationships with founders and those that work there and stuff like that? But also they want to see like strong support, 24/7 monitoring support. Generally maybe like dedicated customer reps. Kind of helping them out and really like leading them through the process, right? Because they're not necessarily like crypto native enough to do like DIY stuff or DeFi staking and stuff. So a lot of it is really education and advisory on what it is, what the actual risks are, and stuff like that. They obviously want to trust the provider, and then kind of at the end of the day, it's really more just like bidding on a contract, like just like a normal software contract, right? Fees, making sure that the infrastructure is kind of where they want, right? Like you could see like some fund or a bank or other institution or whatever basically say like, hey, you can't stake this on cloud providers, right? We want them to be bare metal. Oh, and we want to actually like audit your data centers to make sure that they're good and secure, right? And there's no risk on that. We want to work with you to work with X custody provider. Some staking companies only work with one custody provider. Others are kind of custody agnostic, right? So there's kind of just a lot of factors that just kind of get like plugged in, and from there they kind of just figure it out.
Lanski?
Yeah, I love the point that you made about risk and perceived risk versus actual risk, and this is very calculated even for us, because if you're a home staker in our community, most of the things are like, what happens if my internet goes down? What happens if my power, if there's a power outage in my region? Well, you might miss some attestations, which is about 0.00002 right now, I think. So, I mean, okay, you might miss some attestations. But you do have that risk, and it's very present, and it's probably the probability of this happening over the course of 1 year is very high, that it will happen. But we tend to not consider the black swan events. We tend to not consider what happens if the company that I am staking with, my staking provider, all of a sudden does something and there's a massive slashing event. and there's massive correlation penalties, then I'm not losing 0.0002 in that, or I'm not stopping to earn 0.0002, which is what happens when your power goes down. You're actually being slashed, and this perceived risk is very off the scale, and it's very hard to calculate, and that's why black swan events keep happening all the times, because they're very hard to perceive. And yeah, then I agree with absolutely everything that you guys have said. There's like trust assumptions, custodial versus non-custodial. There's the fees, how much am I getting? Clearly, there's some personal risk, like, okay, I prefer to do an upfront investment and stake myself, and then everything from there is profit, or I prefer to pay something monthly. There's just so many variables, and I think this is great because it brings us to decentralization. The more possibilities we have, the more secure is the network overall.
So I think like the previous participants basically outlined all the main criteria that go into the risk calculus of why somebody might want to run a small operation or put their money into a more centralized or custodian or permissioned or less trustless solution. But I think the thing that underpins solo staking is idealism. It's the idea that in order to be a member of this grand experiment or a member of the polity, you need to be a voter. And the only way to be a real voter is to run the validator yourself. So it means being cognizant of the risk of not having maybe the absolute technical skills to run a validator with perfect uptime. It means being cognizant of the potential risk of losing money over a short period of time due to gas fees or something like that. But it means accepting that risk by being a sovereign individual, by taking the responsibility of safeguarding your own money, your own capital, and your power on the network. And more importantly, also allowing you the leeway to make decisions about how the network runs. So previously we were talking about MEV and how there's like an ideological dilemma between is MEV good and should it be allowed, and is MEV bad, or is it non-good or bad? Is it just neutral and we need to allow it because there's no way around it? If you're running a solo validator, you have the option whether you will extract MEV or not. So if you're antithetical to the idea of MEV, you should run a solo validator and not extract MEV.
And so speaking from the sort of perspective of Lido as like a staking pool, I think there's a couple really strong benefits for staking pools. One, you can actually stake ETH without having to run your own node, and you can actually stake ETH without even having to have 32 ETH. So that lowers the sort of financial barrier for you to be able to participate in validating the network, so to speak, by sort of delegating your ETH in some cases, or like giving your ETH to a pool that's going to operate the nodes for you. Another benefit is, as we were talking about staked ETH, so for those not familiar, when you deposit ETH, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but when you deposit ETH in Lido, you get back staked ETH at a ratio that staked ETH basically represents your ETH that's being staked on the Lido platform. And so as a staker, as a solo staker, your ETH is locked up in your validator, and you're only able to access it if you withdraw it, and withdrawals aren't even enabled right now. But when I'm being confident that the merge is going to happen, and then withdrawals.
In an unknown date in the future.
We'll have another panel.
Yeah.
Soon, TM. So yeah, the staked ETH gives you liquidity and access to your capital to plug into other DeFi platforms as well while you're staking. So it gives you access to that, which you could potentially earn more yield on. And basically, as a like trusted staking pool, you have the opportunity to represent stakers that wouldn't, and give them additional benefit that wouldn't be able to do it on their own. And having educated users, like you're talking about before, they can help you sort of vote with their ETH by showing you which staking pools are the trusted staking pools. So bringing that back even a layer, like being an educated user and an educated ETH holder, being strategic about the staking pools that you pick, and picking staking pools that are not doing things crazy like we were talking about with the different DAO proposals, is a good option for people who don't have access to other means.
from what I've seen, sophisticated stakers, what they do is actually pick a few different options, and they don't lock themselves to a specific thing because they understand there's benefits and downside down things to anything, right? From pools to DIY staking. But I think that the commonality between everything we've spoke about here regarding what you choose to stake with is really down to infrastructure, because each one of those solutions it's has some different things going on behind the scenes, but ultimately most of the infrastructure setups are pretty much the same. You have a Bitcoin node and you have some validator client running, and you have to have only one validator client because otherwise you'll get slashed, and you might diversify with a few Bitcoin nodes, but you still need to be very you need to understand the protocol to do that right, because otherwise you won't get attested so well, or your attestation won't get aggregated and so on. And so it kind of leads me to my next point, which is, by the way, the last point before we have the Q&A, so get your questions in order. Which leads us to SSV. SSV stands for Secret Shared Validator. It's a piece of technology which started out life as a research project by the ETH. And really what it does is takes an Ethereum validator, splits it up into shares, and those shares can be operated by independent operators. And of course, full disclosure, we're working on that. But the thing that got me interested about it is it's really much different in terms of the setup from anything other we have today in Ethereum. And of course, there are benefits. There are benefits for decentralization. There are benefits for security. There are benefits for client diversity. There's benefits for a different number of reasons. And I'm trying to also kind of frame it in something I call layer zero. Layer zero is really kind of maybe the last piece of the puzzle in the Ethereum tech stack, which is layer 1 is the execution, layer 2 is some extension of L1, but layer 0 what secures L1 and makes this whole thing tick. And so my question to you is, what do you see SSV, what role do you see SSV play in the future, and what problems do you think it can solve? Specifically for everything we've talked about, but most importantly, for the future of what we're doing, all we're doing here. And so,
yeah, let's start that one off. So I'll sort of look at this mostly from the perspective of SSV basically being another vector to decentralize. And specifically for me, a focus of mine is client diversity. So that means like basically what client you're running for your beacon node and your validator. And SSV would afford you the opportunity essentially to split your key across multiple different pieces of software that are running, and therefore allow you to use different validator clients, like different versions of software, different implementations of software, and then that allows you to further decentralize. And so right now the network is actually pretty highly centralized on one client, Prism, which is a great client, but if there ever were an issue with Prism, it would cause major issues for the network, and we've seen a little instability there. And so SSV to me is another tool that can help us with client diversity going forward and allow you to decentralize your node, not only running minority clients, but like multiple different clients, and sort of solve the client diversity problem going forward. It could definitely help with that.
Yeah, that's a great point. So from a Lido perspective, and also a disclaimer from our side, the DAO has provided a grant to Bloxstaking, as well as another provider that looks to solve the problem in a similar technical way. So basically what we're looking for is solutions that minimize the surface area of the risk that's posed to the Ether that we stake in Ethereum. So SSV does this in two ways. One, it minimizes the possible incidence of likelihood of certain risk events happening, and then it also potentially minimizes or mitigates the total impact of those events if they happen. And then to a secondary extent, it also potentially allows us to unlock a feature that's a part of our strategy that you mentioned earlier, like that we have this article about how we want to get to a trustless and decentralized Lido protocol, which is that eventually we want anybody to be able to run a node together with Lido. And the easiest way to do that is through SSV, because apart from like the potential effect of correlated risk, like a certain validator client going wrong, and then having them together in an SSV group with a node operator that's running a different set of validator clients. You also minimize the incidence of malicious actors attempting to either ransom people's Ethereum, like Ether, or doing like malignant actions, like getting it slashed on purpose or something like that.
I fully subscribe to what you guys have said. There's not much more to add. I think SSV does exactly that for DappNode as well. The only point that I would add is that a very important part for DappNode right now, and ideologically, we would like to open Web3 to everybody. And what SSV allows you to do is, even if you don't have 32 ETH, we know that you can stake. You can go Lido, and you can be a staker. But you cannot participate on the running, the operations of the network. You cannot earn money if you have some technical knowledge. You need actual Ether. You need actual financial power in order to start staking. So one of the things that I'm excited about, apart from what you guys say, which I fully subscribe, is that by bringing SSV onto DappNode and allow DappNodes to participate into the SSV, it's probably the most uncollateralized, or the one that requires the lowest barrier of entry to start being part of the infrastructure of this layer 0 that you were talking about, of this, like, I don't need 32 ETH in order to start contributing with whatever I have. If I am a small school in Africa that has managed to get a Starlink and has reliable internet connection, they could potentially find a source of revenue within the SSV network by offering the only thing they have, the internet connection and an energy supply. And I think this is really powerful.
Yeah, so first, full disclosure, DCG, our parent company, has invested in SSV and the Blox team. But like from our perspective, right, it's kind of a win-win all around. So if you are a just like an individual node operator, right, you run one node. Why wouldn't you also want to kind of use the infrastructure from like top staking companies alongside yours, right? You can kind of benefit from like security and resiliency on that end, while you kind of get the sovereignty of running the node yourself, right? From an institutional play, right, it's when we're looking at like onboarding some institution to stake with us, right? Obviously, we probably want all the capital come our way, right? But like when you think about it, why would an institution not want to stake with all top 5 staking providers in the ecosystem at the moment, right? It's kind of a no-brainer. Like that's what's going to happen. So we might as well kind of work together with some of the top staking providers to kind of enable that. And that's just kind of the way that we've been going about it.
Cool. Yeah. What I find very exciting is like the splitting of the risk with SSV. I think that's one of the key value propositions there, and then especially like also for the node infrastructure providers, that they are able to run a node and contribute to a network and keep like what you just mentioned earlier, like it's idealistic to run a node, and it's great that we have so many people to want to support the network and be part of something and have the actual voting power and so on, and then with SSC being able to do that, and at the same time also all the benefits of contributing to a staking pool, for example, and making it easy to stake with less than 32 ETH and have tokenized stake and all of that. So this is probably the most exciting thing about SSV.
I would definitely encourage. I have 2 extra points which are not kind of rarely talked about in relation to SSV, but I really encourage anyone who wants to become an operator on SSV or kind of give it a go and see how it works. Just go to ssv.network. We have a testnet running. I really hope you do that and kind of get exposure. I would say two other points which I think are really important. When we're talking about layer 0, we're not just talking about validators. There's 2 other components. First of all, most staking pools, and I would imagine a lot of the other staking solutions built on top of it, will need some kind of an oracle. And that oracle will need to feed some data into the smart contracts, and everyone is using it. I think with SSV, once you have a set of operators which use consensus, there's nothing preventing you from having a very reliable oracle plugged into your contract, which I think it's in of itself very tied to L0, because if the staking pool is reliant on an outsource component of data, it needs to be secure as well. And the second point is actually key management, where we're talking about generating new keys. We draw credentials. We kind of got solved with smart contracts. That's not an issue. But the validator keys, we actually can now start thinking about stuff like distributed key generation and so on, which is actually backed or generated by a consensus protocol. So we can actually extend those things and get even more sophisticated ways of managing our keys. Like, imagine you have 100 operators generating together the validator key. The withdraw credentials are for a smart contract. There's literally a single point of failure. That's it. Like, you cut off 50% of the risk. Now everyone is working with a consensus protocol. You eliminated the other 49.9%, which is slashing. And so I really hope to see that happening. I think that, if we can make Ethereum safe with the 1/100th of the risk, that's a no-brainer. And so I really think decentralization is the way to go. We really need to lower risk whenever we're doing something, and really hope people will pay notice to that. And so with that in mind, I wanted to open up for a Q&A. If anyone has a question, I don't know if we have a microphone over there, but if we don't, let's try to organize one. I'll start off with a question I got from the community, which is, what do you think the fees for staking will look like in the future? Because today they're around about 10% of your rewards. Where do you see it going?
You mean the fee that you'd pay like validators to run stuff for you, or the fee that you earn? That for a service, yeah.
For an outside service, for doing it for you, yeah.
So I mean, pretty much similar across, all other validator services. 10% is kind of like market rate. And really, any L1 that you're staking, the fees are generally 8 to 12%, somewhere in there, right? But I think everyone's probably in pretty much agreement that like over time it's gonna be a race to the bottom on the fees, right? Like everyone's still like working really hard to make sure that everything's integrated, and new chains pop up every single day, and people are working on adding those. But eventually, like it'd be similar to just kind of like ETF management fees and like fund management fees in the future, right? I'd even say like in like between like 2 and 5 years from now, the fees will start going like sub 2 and 1%, depending on the chain, of course, right? If it's a newer, you're going to see higher fees. If it's been established, you're going to see lower fees.
Gotcha. Yeah, question over there. We have a microphone? No, we don't have a microphone? There you go. We'll pass it through.
Can you hear me? So if Prism retains its supermajority and has a consensus bug, will the chain be rolled back, or will 70% of stakers lose 75% of their ETH?
Colfax, give a go.
So I can't speak to what will happen, because that would be in the future. This gets at the crux of why client diversity is so important, to avoid ever having to deal with a situation like that. Anybody can have an opinion on like what the humans behind running nodes will decide to do. But for those who don't know exactly what that means, so Prism right now is a super majority, which means it has over 66% of the network. And if there's a bug in Prism, it'll essentially create kind of like an irreversible fork of the network. And the way the network finalizes, there will sort of be this event where when Prism fixes the bug, it will the Prism validators will re-enter what that the original Ethereum network is, and there will be quite a lot of problems. There'll be a mass slashing, and it will cause quite a lot of issues in the space. So this is kind of a non-answer, but the way I would answer it is we should work extremely hard right now to remove the supermajority from Prism, so we avoid that issue ever happening, because it's going to be a very nasty situation if that ever does happen. So I don't know if anybody else has any other comments.
And by the way, anyone who didn't read Prism's blog post around their supermajority and their stance on it, definitely go read about it. Their approach is very, very much pro-diversification and so on. And so I think their approach is good. It's just to kind of clear things up around that.
And just to add one more thing, piggybacking off of that, there's nothing against Prism the client. In fact, one of the reasons why they got such a strong market share is they had very good support at the beginning of the early testnets. They have a web UI, which is like one of the things that Lanski and I talk about all the time, which enables more stakers to be able to have more information about their node and operate their node more easily. So the Prism team's amazing. I know many people on the team. It's just more pro-minority clients. So like, how can we bring the other clients to serve the same user experience and have more equal share across the network? So definitely no anti-Prism here. It's just being strategic about where you think about what client you're going to run.
Cool. Anyone else? Do we have any questions? Yeah. Yeah.
Hi. So I'm just going to say I don't hold any Bitcoin, but one of the arguments against proof of stake that you hear from the maxis is that it leads to centralization just simply because the rich get richer, right? If you don't need to spend your returns, that means it concentrates in the hands of the rich. I just wonder what you guys thought of that.
Well, yeah, it's a problem. I mean, I think that my personal point of view is that I think you can always have the risk of centralization. I do think with the approach, the POS for Ethereum got designed for, it does give us ways to use technology to decentralize it. And so I'm very hopeful. I think that with technology, with such discussions around it, and decentralization is not just one thing. It's an array of things, from client diversity all the way to where the stake is. I think that you are in a position where we can actually fight it off. People tend to use centralized services because they are much quicker to get access to complicated concepts or complicated instruments like staking. But I think with Ethereum and the way it was designed, it's definitely in the forefront of what everyone is talking about. And so I would say that it's in our hands as a community, where in proof of work, for example, it's very much harder to resist centralization just because of the economies of scale. It just doesn't make sense to be non-centralized or decentralized.
Yeah, and so it's funny that they say that, because there's quite a small number of mining pools that control Bitcoin. And it, as Alon was saying, there's really not much you can do. Like, if you want to put your laptop to start mining Bitcoin, you're not going to get anything. But if you use a staking pool with a very small amount of ETH, you can get the same return that you would get. You get the big guys gets 7%, and the small guys with 0.5 ETH get 7%. So it doesn't feel to me that to me this is really like not an issue at all. So it's, yeah, I think it stems from a very strong stance of fear, of having something they're being attacked, or Bitcoin or proof of work is being attacked because of this environmental externalities that it causes. So as a reaction of that, it's like, yes, but the solutions are more centralizing, less democratic, less. But it's not really true. I would say it's not true. I don't know what you guys think.
Any other questions, anyone? Yeah, maybe we can leave the microphone there. I'll just pass it on.
This is a really broad, open-ended question. What are your thoughts about the importance of layer 2 consensus for staking pools and just in general?
What do you mean by layer 2 consensus?
So like basically, for example, like Polygon, I was told they only have 5 validators to commit back to the layer 1. So basically, if one of those validators goes down, then Polygon can't commit back to the layer 1. So there's some projects that are trying to do layer 2 consensus. So like basically there's no centralized party that's committing back to the layer 1, but it's like there's a system of checks in place to check the validators which are committing back to the layer 1. Is this something you guys have thought about for staking pools or just in general?
So I would say that not all L2s are born the same. So
Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken, optimistic rollups or the kinds of implementation of that do have relayers, but those relayers are not a point of failure in that anyone can send a transaction and create kind of the next block in that. And also, of course, the commitment is on L1. And so, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe I'm missing something. Right. So. In general, I would say that if you have that point of centralization, then it stops being L2 anymore. It's simply a custodial. But again, I'm not too familiar with the specific of whatever implementation it is, right? Yeah.
So from my perspective, it kind of comes full circle with a discussion we were having earlier with regards to what is everybody's risk appetite and risk calculus, right? So there should be products for basically all of the different types of investors, right? Depending on how much risk or custody of your funds you're willing to give up for what utility you get out of it, right? So in general, the more decentralized a network fully is, even if it's layer 2 or a sidechain or whatever, the more expensive, quote unquote, it will be, because it's that much more work to do something in a truly decentralized manner, right? So I think there will always be demand for maybe less decentralized networks. And the question is, from our perspective, as either like staking pool providers or people who create platforms for people to stake on those platforms, is how we can encourage them to decentralize as much as possible. And what other solutions we can come up with to ameliorate the problems that arise from L2s. So, like before we were talking about MEV, and the idea is that eventually when everything is on L2, like most transactions are in L2, there won't be MEV on layer 1, and MEV will move to layer 2, right? And so that's a whole problem in and of itself, and we can't do anything about it from the layer 1 perspective. And then we have to either rely on algorithms or sequencers that are either like ordained depending on the protocol. So like Arbitrum has decided that they're going to work with Chainlink to do fair sequencing. Other protocols say, we're going to do MEV gas auctions. So all of those things also need to be considered when you're thinking about what L2 you want to use to do your activity on.
This brings me to another point that I wanted to make, which is kind of layer 2 related, but not quite, which is what happens with the rest of the network. So what happens with Matic? Matic will continue having 5 validators? I think not. I think the success of Ethereum 2, especially after the merge, will bring more and more chains into some sort of like really decentralized. The centralization will not be that hard, and we're seeing that with the proposal of stake. To stake XLI, to start moving towards the same consensus as Ethereum 2, and that's something that's going to happen more and more, and we're going to be seeing more decentralization, and therefore, since your question was related to staking pools, more opportunities for staking pools, or even individual stakers as well, to participate in this layer 2, to participate in this rest of the protocol. So we're everything is set up so we can decentralize more and more and offer more opportunities to the people that want to stake and the people that want to participate in the security.
Next question. Here we go. Over there.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. My question is if you could categorize Ethereum in terms of decentralization, where 0% is basically completely centralized and 100% is completely decentralized. Where would you right now categorize Ethereum in, if possible?
Well, I think it depends on how do you measure decentralization. So you can say it's decentralized or not decentralized depending on the amount of validators or miners today. You can say it's decentralized or not decentralized depending on who commits code to GitHub. You can say it's decentralized or not decentralized by the mere fact that Vitalik exists and he's the face of Ethereum. So I think it's not a single thing. I would say that from everything I saw, extreme decentralization leads to stagnation. We do see it in Bitcoin, and it's a shame. It's so decentralized in the way it's developed that they can't make decisions, and it's not progressing anywhere. But on the other hand, decentralization with Bitcoin is literally what defines Bitcoin as a store of value, because it's nobody's. It's everyone's, but nobody's. And so I think Ethereum is in some senses not as decentralized. But on the other hand, I think from a technology point of view, it's probably running years ahead of anyone else in terms of the protocol level and its tendency to become decentralized.
And just piggybacking off what he said about the different categories of decentralization, on top of that, each category of decentralization has a different amount of like risk associated with it if something were to go wrong. And so when you're talking about like geographical node distribution, like if all the nodes were located in one area, so put that at I guess 100% centralization or whatever. I mean, if the power goes out, power regularly goes out in like one area, so that'd be a big problem. One area of centralization that some people don't really think about all that often is the programming language clients are written in. So right now, the most common execution client, which is Geth, is written in the programming language Go, and Prism, which is the most common consensus layer ETH2 client, is also written in Go. And so if there's an issue with the language Go, that could be a big problem. But the likelihood of that where there's an issue in the programming language, that would also affect like the way the nodes run is like relatively low. And so it's very hard to come up with a number. I would say as far as like all the projects that I've seen, I would say Ethereum's on the high level of decentralization, but I can't really put a number to it because it's very complex to decide what layers and like the propensity of risk to actual decentralization.
Yeah, like the previous speaker said, I think it's really hard to put a number on it, so I'm gonna give you a runaround answer. I think Ethereum is less decentralized than it theoretically could be right now, and there's a lot of room for improvement. And it should definitely aim to be more decentralized going forward. But I think if you take any other chain that would have reached the maturation level of Ethereum right now, it would not be as decentralized as it is. And I think that's because like the people who are a part of this network, the users of the network, the foundations, you know, that develop it and like steward the ecosystem are unparalleled. And the reason why you see so much like novel ingenuity happening in Ethereum is because the people really believe in it and what it's trying to do, and we'll get there eventually when the context allows us to.
Yeah, not much to add. I fully agree. I feel like there's a programmatic solution for a percentage, but you need to really define the criteria. And if you choose another set of criteria, you're going to have a different number. Just for the sake of the exercise, because I think it's fun, I'd go with a range of like definitely more than 50% decentralized. So we're on the good side, we're on the green. So my range would be between the 50 and the 65-70% decentralized. Actually, I'm being way too generous, but yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'm gonna compare it across like in comparison to other L1s, right? So Ethereum is like extremely decentralized compared to other L1s, right? From a few different categories. One, even though there is a supermajority with, or specifically, let's say like ETH2, right? Supermajority on Prism. Well, a lot of the other staking L1s are mono-client. There's only one, and it's developed by the team, right? It's not developed by other teams that want to see client diversity in the ecosystem, right? Another one that like we've been thinking about a decent amount is like once we move fully to proof of stake, right? The biggest thing is like ease of use for even just like individuals, right? Where they're gonna, how they're gonna do it? They're gonna do it directly through their wallet, or they're just gonna do it on an exchange, right? And that's kind of similar across all L1s, right? But the cool thing with Ethereum is like we're kind of setting a lot of like building blocks to kind of enable that, to where people are going to want to stake across multiple validators, and even if they're onboarding it through their wallet or through the exchange, the actual validation might be spread across multiple different validators and services.
Yeah, I fully agree that Ethereum is so much more decentralized than all the other layer 1 proof of stake blockchains. And that's probably why I'm also like the most excited about the merge is that like there are right now like 19 out of 20 proof of stake layer 1 smart contract platforms are based on proof of stake. And now Ethereum has been the first one to announce it kind of, and they are the last one to implement it. And that's because like they care a lot about like everyone in the ecosystem cares a lot about decentralization, and that's really, really good, I think. And I actually would take it to a point where I say that like no other layer 1 can compete with Ethereum if they are not more decentralized than Ethereum. And that's I think where Ethereum can do much, much more, but they're already positioned way ahead of everyone else.
So not to be the party pooper, but GitHub controls everything, guys. So just to put things in perspective. Oh yeah, it was radical, and yeah, that's not gonna happen. Or you can just take down Docker Hub, and we'll have no updates ever again. Next question, anyone?
Do you think there'll be a token split after the hard fork, or like a split in the chain, or what's your thoughts on that?
Well, for sure there's going to be a split. Are you asking, will we see Ethereum Classic?
Yeah, that sort of thing, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure we will.
So will there be a sort of quite
That's a good idea if anyone wants to do that.
Will there be a quite significant group of miners that will move to that, or?
That's actually a good question. I won't say how I know it, but I definitely know there was a back and forth between miners and, let's say, other officials. Yeah, I mean, you're risking their livelihood, definitely. I would imagine they would want to do something about it. I'm not sure Ethereum Classic will be the solution. It might direct things to other chains, but yeah, we might go maybe one action item out of this kind of conference or event is let's do ETH Classic. Yeah, let's keep proof of work alive. Yeah, that's the answer. Okay, so I have an exercise in decentralized voting. In front of us, there's hot food coming out of the kitchen. Would you guys want to continue with a few more questions or go eat? Show of hands. Who wants to go eat? Who wants to continue with questions? Well, it's kind of a tie. We'll do one more and we'll finish it up. Okay, who's the last one? Last question? Oh, if we don't have any other questions, that's fine. So, thank you very much. You've been really, really great. You guys were really, really patient. I think what we've talked about is really important. And, go to Discords, go to read blogs, go to educate yourself about those topics, because that's the only thing that really separates us from Ethereum as we like it to be to Ethereum that we don't want it to be. And so thank you, and have a great evening.